Good morning to all. Okay, so this is the first track on macroeconomic implication of employment, and we are really concerned about the way employment market or job market is moving ahead. And today we have two eminent speakers, Professor Amitabh Kundu and Mr. Mohesh Bas. And welcome to the future of employment and challenges. Two. Okay, let me first introduce our first speaker of this session. Mr. Mohesh Bas is a managing director and CEO of Center for Monitoring Indian Economy Private Limited. Welcome, sir. And he is the chief architect of CMI proprietary database. All of us are using quite long time. And he created the consumer pyramid database, and that is also we are subscribed and we are also using that. And this is the largest and fastest and technological, the most advanced household survey in developing country like India. Mohesh Bas also writes on this job a weekly, every Tuesday column on Business Standard. His recent work include creation of new and innovative measures of investment trade in the country by exploiting a unique database of investment inventories created by the CMI. And he also he has more than 20 years of experience. He strategized, engineered the company's transition from private think tank to a database company, then into a database-oriented business solution company. Mr. Mohesh Bas also served as independent director in many organizations, including Geojit, BNP Paribas Financial Service Limited. He was also an independent director of Centurion Bank and also Quantum Assets Management. And he's also practitioner and has a vast experience of labor market and job market, what is happening in fact. So we'll very eager to listen him, and he has on the spot or what he call on the field experience of job market, what exactly happening. So sir, we are expecting lot of on the field experience of job market. What is the dynamic, what are the changed impact, what is the COVID impact on this. So we are very, very happy to welcome you. And also we have second speaker, and he doesn't need any introduction as such, Professor Amitabh Kundu. He is a distinguished professor and also senior fellow right now Sustainable Cities and Transport Organized Program in WRI, India. Dr. Kundu has worked as a professor, distinguished fellow in many places in India and also international universities. So he was a professor and dean of the School of Social Science at Jawaharlal Nehru University, member of National Statistical Commission, and chaired the post-Sachar Evaluation Committee, and that for estimating urban housing shortage. He was also regional advisor on poverty at UNSCOR, Beirut, and consultant to Sri Lankan government on population census. Currently, he is chairing the committee to monitor the national survey being conducted for Swachh Bharat mission for the Ministry of Drinking Water and Sanitation. He was also visiting professor at the University of Amsterdam, Science Po and Mission de Science de l'Homme, University of Kaiserslautern, and University of Oxford. He was also director of various institutes of India and is in the editorial board of a large number of national and international journals. He has about 25 books and 200 research articles. Sir, very good morning and welcome to this future of employment challenges and opportunities. So we are very eager to listen to your experience working in different countries and comparing different labor markets and suggestion for improving the labor market in India. Thank you so much. So before I start my opening remarks, so we are concerned about the labor market. I think most of the concerns are sitting there behind the in our this auditorium. Students are more concerned what is going to be in the future, whether they will get jobs or no jobs, and what kind of education is required, what kind of skills required to get into the job market, what are the entry barriers are there, what are the demand and supply factors being governing these job markets. And in fact, we have experienced the economic growth deceleration starting from 2016-17, then demonetization happened. This has negative impact on the economic growth, job market, and many other aspects, followed by the COVID economic disaster that is for the job market. Right now, we are coming back to the normal questions. How much normality have restored? Whether we have restored to the normal position that pre-COVID era or in this post-COVID era, what are things have happened? Right? Is the job market same? Is there significant change in structural of labor markets, structure of the labor market and growth? Which are the sectors that is generating economic growth? The government should target, right? The so-called labor-intensive industries and capital-intensive sector have changed. The boundary between the labor-intensive sector and the capital-intensive sector has converging, right? And due to globalization, competition, many other aspects. So where the job market is heading? Should we concerned as academicians? What are the suggestions we can give to the government, right? And also as a policymaker, what they need to do to change the dynamics of the labor markets, right? So every year around 12 million new level job seekers are entering the markets, right? And we are creating around 5 lakh, 6 lakh million of jobs. That is on optimistic estimates. So that means every year, though we are not able to at least cater the demands of new entrants. There is a huge backlog of around 150 to 200 millions of people are waiting for these jobs. And also recent studies have suggested that almost 20 to 30% of people are voluntarily withdrawing from the labor markets after looking for jobs around 6 months to 8 months. The waiting period has gone up, right? So as a society, as an economy, and are we doing justice to the labor market? What can be done on this aspect? Can we provide adequate jobs? Not only adequate jobs, decent jobs, right? So we are talking about decent jobs, and the level of informalization has gone up significantly. And the manufacturing sector employment, sadly, it has declined. It has declined, and with the technological change, everything, I don't see any scope of net addition of employment in manufacturing sector, right? So we are talking about that we are replacing China. How feasible it is? What are the factors? What are the infrastructure, logistic? What are the steps, policies required? At least if you can cater some around 20-30% of China, what China was meeting, that way we can add to the employment. So with these remarks, and we are more concerned about the structure of unemployment. There is long unemployment, long. They are waiting for 6 months, 8 months to get jobs. They are not getting into, so they are, and as a consequence, the self-employment, level of self-employment has gone up significantly. Is it good for the society? And this has consequence for the poverty, inequality, quality of life, and overall development. So, are we heading in the right directions? Do we need cross-check our policies? What need to be done? How to make labor market flexible and employable? And what skills need to be changed or set up? And you know already that National Skills Council is there under Prime Ministership, and the target was to skill 500 million people. And where are we now? Are we doing the enough to make skilling the people to get the jobs? So these are the some questions. So I may throw upon the my speakers. Please, sir, please address them. So may I invite Mr. Mohesh Bas to start his address. Sir, the modality of this presentation is you have 25 minutes, and both speakers have 25 minutes. So first, Mr. Bas, then followed by Professor Kundu. Thank you so much. Once again, welcome you, sir.
A very good morning to everyone over here, and thank you very much Dr. Jyoti Chandiramani, and everybody from Symbiosis Institute to invite me here this morning to address such an energetic crowd over here. Delighted to see so many bright young faces. The future of tomorrow, the future of employment is what we have to worry for you, and we will discuss that a little bit. Thank you, Dr. Dash, for the very warm welcome, and you've been very, very generous with all that you have said about me. So thank you so much. I have a very short presentation and I may take less than 25 minutes. So I'll have the pleasure of listening to more senior people, more experienced people, more wiser people than me. So, and they are distinguished economists. And I'm just a CEO. It makes a big difference. So, as was pointed out earlier, CMI builds databases, and my presentation is based entirely on the databases that we build. So the databases are not exactly private, although they are called privately created databases, because this is subscribed to by your institute and is subscribed to many other institutes. It's used very widely now. So I'll be mostly using the Consumer Pyramids Household Survey to show a few things. But before that, because the topic for today's session, this session, is macroeconomics and employment. So I'll have one slide and a few thoughts to share on macroeconomics and employment. So I think from a macroeconomic perspective, employment is just conspicuous by its absence. So, we talk a lot about growth, and everywhere when one discusses the Indian economy, one is discussing what's going to happen to growth. Are we going to grow at 6%? Are we going to go at 7%? Is 10% possible? Or will we drop down to 4%? And there's intense debate on this. There's intense discussion on this. Whether it is the Ministry of Finance, whether it is Niti Aayog, whether it is the RBI or its Monetary Policy Committee, or it is the markets in India, or it is foreign investors in India, everywhere the interest is essentially growth. An associated indicator with growth is inflation. So, growth and strangely not employment is the key macroeconomic indicator. And when we speak about employment, we say, of course, growth will create employment. I think that's a fair point. Growth will create employment, but then we stop short of actually measuring whether it did or not. And if the results show us that growth did not necessarily create employment, then we leave the question unaddressed and go back to saying, but we can get growth. But eventually we will get employment. But the employment problem is tucked under somewhere. And what we talk about, what we boast about, what we worry about is growth. So growth has become the huge monster on us, and its outcome, which is supposed to be employment, is not a macroeconomic variable of consequence. So, you look at the Monetary Policy Committee's pronouncements, discussions, debates, press conferences, they all talk about the trade-off between inflation and growth, interest rates and growth. Almost never interest rates and unemployment. Almost never growth and employment. Whereas the world over, the trade-off is, and even theory teaches us, the trade-off is supposed to be between the unemployment rate and the inflation rate. India is unique. We talk about inflation. We have mandatory parliament-approved targets of inflation, but we do not have correspondingly the trade-off, which is what will we do regarding unemployment. So relatively recently, but nevertheless, the United States mandated not just an inflation target, but even an unemployment target simultaneously. Which means that the objective is not only to control inflation, which has been the case in the past, but to control inflation and maintain an acceptable level of the unemployment rate as well. In India, we don't even start thinking about it. We skid away into growth. So I think what's important is that, people, you and I, don't get anything out of growth. You and I get a lot out of employment. So, in a sense, in a democratic country like India, the electorate, we should be talking about employment. And we should be talking less about growth if it does not deliver employment. So, in the macroeconomic thinking of India, one extremely important indicator, which is actually to a great extent the reason why we study economics, is to generate employment and decent employment. You talk about the fiscal policy, nobody talks about its impact upon on employment. We talk about growth again. So there's a growth number embedded in the budget calculations because we calculate GFD, gross fiscal deficit, as a percent of GDP. That's also a very important macroeconomic indicator. All people talk about the percentage of fiscal deficit to GDP, but nobody talks about the expenditures impact on employment generation. So employment is missing from our two large macroeconomic handles, not in the monetary policy, not in the fiscal policy. The reports are almost completely absent of employment. If they talk of employment, it will be tucked away far away. In the economic survey, you'll rarely see a major talk on employment. It will be tucked away in volume 2. Not even in volume 1. Volume 2 will be a chapter on employment written on dated data, and there's no effort to update it. So, correspondingly, we do no justice to measuring employment as well. So, that's where the problem is. The focus is on growth and inflation and not on employment and inequality. So, I think this is the first point I want to make because the topic is macroeconomics. So let's move on to easier slides. No, this is a little more involved, but I'd like everyone to pay a little attention. Please bear with me on this. I think a lot of the people who discuss employment, unemployment problems hang on to the unemployment rate. And every month CMI comes out with the unemployment rate, and every month I have to deal with a whole lot of journalists asking me, why did the unemployment rate go up? This is a 6-month high, this is a 2-year high, and if it goes down, nobody calls me. If it goes up, they say this is an X month high. So what has caused the unemployment rate to go up? And I oftentimes tell them, like I told them last month as well. So last month in December 2022, the unemployment rate went up from 8% to 8.3%. Now 8% is bad. 8.3% is just as bad. But what the journalists did is often they say, this is an X month high. Maybe this is a 6-month high or a 9-month high or whatever. So what has caused this and what is the reason for this? And I say this is not a big deal. If 8% wasn't a big deal, neither is this, because unemployment has gone up. The unemployment rate has gone up, but unemployment has gone up. And please see, employment has also gone up and gone up quite well. So, oftentimes, the unemployment rate is a misleading number of the labor market conditions, is a misleading number of the health of the economy. So I've plucked out one example to demonstrate this. And this is real data. But I go back to 2016, 17, 17, 18. That's when we began doing our survey in 2016 January. So this is April to March 2016, 17. As you will see in the second column, the unemployment rate dropped to from 7.42% to 4.69%. Okay? This is a significant drop, a 2.73 percentage points drop, which is not small. Okay? Now we can, go merrily into the markets to say demonetization has caused a drop in unemployment. We had an impact on the Indian economy. We solved an unemployment problem in a big way because look, even a private agency is saying that the unemployment rate came down in 17-18, the year just after demonetization year, which was 16-17. So we have reason to rejoice. As you will see in the next column, the unemployed in absolute terms, in millions, dropped dramatically from 30 million to 20 million. It's not a small drop, you know. So, what will I read till here? That the 13 million got jobs. So, if the unemployment number falls, we'll naturally believe that those 13 million who are not counted as unemployed anymore must have got jobs. But so the first two columns are very, very nice, that this demonetization is doing wonders for the country. But next you look at the labor force. And here we see a strange 14 million drop. So if those 13 million people got jobs, then the labor force should have ballooned. And it didn't, because the unemployed fell and so did the employed. 1 million people by the end of the year had lost their jobs. So, what actually happened is these 14 million people lost jobs or lost hopes of getting jobs and left the labor market. Labor economists will call it out of labor force. Okay? So, when you see the labor force itself shrinking, it's not a good thing to see. So, the unemployment rate was not telling us that the labor force had shrunk, which is a terrible thing to happen. So the unemployment rate is an inadequate measure of macroeconomic health of the country. So you got to look a little further, and I think the last column is the most important column, which is the employment rate, which is how much percent of the working age population were employed. And this number, as you can see, dropped from 42.8% to 41.7%. So lesser people as a percent of the working age population. Mind you, population is continuously increasing. So employment should continuously increase. What we have seen in 17-18 compared to 16-17 is that employment dropped. Employment as a percent of the working age population dropped actually even more sharper. So nothing can go wrong in looking at the employment rate. It's a rock solid number. This number is also the most relevant number. So instead of focusing too much on unemployment rate, which is a useful indicator undoubtedly, but for a country like India where the labor force participation rate is very low, and mind you, the numbers you're seeing over here are high compared to where they are now. The employment rate in the country today is around 37-38%, and the labor force participation rate is 39 to 40%. So these numbers are high because they're about 5 years old. So what's important is, I'll leave one message with you, that macroeconomics should have employment numbers associated with them, should have that as a part of the discussion. And the second point is, it's not just the unemployment rate, but also the employment rate. So that's the second point I have to make. Third is some facts drawn from the Consumer Pyramids Household Survey. And here we'll see the first slide on the left-hand side on top gives you the annual numbers, shows us that in the year of the COVID, employment did fall quite substantially and did recover thereafter. So this is annual number. An annual number gives you some amount of truth till some point in time. But the right-hand side one is interesting, is very important actually. It shows the growth of the working age population. This is an estimation, but that steadily keeps growing. Okay, this is a projection, but nevertheless it's important. It is steadily growing. And compared to that, look at the employment numbers. They're just stagnant. So the problem, like the old planning commission used to talk about employment as a backlog. The backlog of employment is what the planning commission used to talk about. We don't talk about it anymore, but this tells you how the backlog is growing. The right-hand side top chart, that the population, the working age population is steadily increasing and employment is almost stagnant. This is a quarterly chart. So the first one was an annual chart. The right-hand side is a quarterly chart. And at the bottom, we'll see the advantage of fast frequency indicators. So I'm reminded, Dr. Chandran Romani, when you called me last time for the Future of Employment 1, I had made a strong case then. I think that was 2019. I had made a strong case then, along with Dr. Ajit Ghosh on the desk on the chair with me was that we must do fast frequency indicators. And fast frequency indicators tell us a lot more. The government still does urban employment numbers on a quarterly basis and does rural and urban only on an annual basis. So it can never tell you the whole story or the complete story behind the stress that the pandemic caused us. And the lower chart will show you what that stress was. There's a sharp fall in employment in absolute terms, and it bounced back, but did not bounce back adequately. But it's good to note, the very last point in this line at the bottom, it's kind of going up. So something to go home a little happily that employment is going up. In December 2022, it was higher than it was before the pandemic, which is, I think, a good sign. So let's move on from the employment. The third point I'm making is that employment is stagnant. It is not growing, but the working age population numbers are growing. Here I point out to the quality of jobs. And as you can see over here, that the quality of jobs is deteriorating. On the left-hand side is quarterly numbers on farmers and daily wage laborers. These are almost entirely informal employment. Daily wage laborers don't know whether they'll get their next day's job or not. So they're extremely vulnerable in terms of employment, type of employment. And so are farmers, in a sense, very highly vulnerable. It may rain, it may not rain, pests may ruin your crop, and so on and so forth. So the extremely vulnerable part is a much higher proportion and much more vulnerable. You can see the COVID dip is very sharp for them than businessmen and salaried people. So this just tells you a little story that we are still a highly informal employment country, although the share was falling. But look at the right-hand side chart. That is distressing. And I will use the word distressing really. That what we call as businessmen are actually mostly self-employed people because they don't get jobs and their numbers are growing and salaried employees' numbers is falling. It fell in the pandemic and did not recover. And that's the good quality job, relatively good quality job. Even salary jobs can be lousy sometimes. But what is clear over here is what is rising. Mind you, on the left-hand side, farmers and daily wage laborers did recover. Okay, after the pandemic, it did recover. On the right-hand side, we see that businessmen also recovered. The only line that has not recovered is salaried employees. So we are losing. Employment is stagnant, we saw earlier. Here we are seeing that employment is not of good quality jobs, the kind of jobs that you and I would like to get. Okay? When we clear our exams over here and go into the labor market, we want that right-hand side red line job. That is stressing us out that it's not growing. Look at the wage difference. These are average numbers. This includes everyone in this. But the salaried employees have a much higher wage rate compared to business people, compared to small traders, and compared to farmers. And see, the gap is also increasing. At the bottom, you can see the gap between the wages earned by salaried people compared to others. So I'm just kind of quantifying that the salaried jobs are better because they are giving you more income. And that's what we want from the job, that they should be giving you more income. So I see a problem over here rapidly, loss of good jobs, and demonstrating that good jobs are the better paying jobs. Here's another one. And Professor Santosh Mehrotra has been talking about this, crying horse on this, that there is a fall in manufacturing jobs. And here I demonstrate that from the Consumer Pyramids Household Survey. On the left-hand side, we see agriculture, industry, and services, and industry has fallen but recovered. Okay, industry has fallen but recovered. And agriculture and services are kind of okay, and agriculture is kind of falling now. But look at the right-hand side again. I break up industry further. And here, the recovery in industry was all construction. Was all construction workers. They're not the best paid workers. And manufacturing, the red line below, has not recovered. So that is stressful. Its recovery is extremely painful. One doesn't know when it will finally catch up with what it was before the pandemic. And mind you, look at the manufacturing sector. It took a hit during demonetization that it never recovered from. And it then took a bigger hit in the pandemic times, and it has still not recovered from that. So, double whammy in a 6-year period for manufacturing, the most well paying job, arguably, is in trouble. So, if manufacturing cannot give us jobs enough, if salary jobs are therefore not rising, we are in a bit of a spot. So again, just showing you what the relative wages are. So it's happened that mines is biggest because PSUs are involved over here. Utilities, again, it is PSUs. But services and manufacturing wage rates are comparable, much better than construction, which is the one which is growing the fastest. So this is the last slide I have. Have I overshot my time, sir? No? Okay. 10 more minutes. Okay, I won't take so much. So this is the one which is causing the stress. Why are salary jobs not increasing? Why is manufacturing jobs not increasing? Why is employment at large not increasing? This is a chart of the growth in net fixed assets of non-finance companies. So I'll repeat. It is the growth in fixed assets. Net fixed assets, sorry. So net fixed assets of companies is what makes them produce goods, right? We learned that in school, that you require to grow the assets of companies only when a plant and machinery is created, only when capital goods are purchased, when land is taken, machinery is set up, etc., do we get jobs. So we want, and that's the macroeconomic handle I would like to look at, is how fast are the larger companies of India growing their net fixed assets. And what is important is these large companies. So I have a problem with MSMEs. They are very large in numbers. They provide jobs to a very large number of people, but they are systematically inefficient users of capital, inefficient users of labor. So they have a role to play, but I think strategically I would, and I'm not a policy maker, but I would still say that it is the larger enterprises. We want the Infosys, the TCS, the Tata Motors, the Bajaj Autos, and so on and so forth, to be aggressively investing into their productive capacities. Because when they aggressively become big, they provide us jobs. They give us the better paying jobs. Now, we don't have a problem if the MSMEs are also growing, but what is definitely required is these larger companies to grow. If the larger companies are not growing, then we have a problem. And that's where I think India's biggest problem is. And the situation looks grim. Is that this is a sample of about 35,000 companies. This graph is about 35,000 companies who account for over 70% of the organized sectors or large productive sector. 70% of the corporate taxes collected by the government of India is paid by these companies. 70%. That's fairly large. So just 35,000 companies or so pay 70% of the taxes. And so it's a very large representation of the economy, and they are not growing their assets. If they don't grow their assets, and mind you, in the last few years, when the net fixed assets growth was merely 3%, they were reaping unbelievable profits. They had never seen such profits. More than twice the profits they had ever seen in their history, they made in these 2 pandemic years. When they made these windfall profits, they did not grow their assets. So it means giving the tax breaks that we gave the corporates before the pandemic hit us is actually wasted. It has helped the companies reap enormous profits, but not deliver on growing their assets and increase employment. So I think that is the biggest challenge. We require to see this turn up. If it doesn't turn up, then I think employment in the good sector is unlikely to happen. So the outcomes of the story that I've said so far is that because there are not enough jobs, there is an increased discrimination against women. And I think the discrimination is stark, and I say this from a very simplistic sense, that the labor participation rate of women is much lower than that of men. Okay? Women come less asking for jobs, much less asking for jobs. And yet, they have a significantly higher unemployment rate. So, how is it? And the education is more or less comparable now. So, how is it that when education is the same, when the ask is low, the supply is so lesser? So, this is clearly a case of discrimination, that industry and other entrepreneurs or whoever else is not willing to give jobs to women who are well educated, who are equally or better educated than men. So, if they are asking for jobs, why not give it to them? So, I think this is a problem, that there isn't enough jobs in the market to make entrepreneurs feel that we have to employ the women as well. When they see a trade-off, they tend to hire more men, and that's the discrimination I'm talking about. So the second problem as an outcome of this, the youth is taking a big hit. So when that net fixed asset growth declines, it is very unlikely that people who are already working in the companies are going to lose their job. We don't see much of that. People are not getting laid off. People are not getting laid off, not as yet at least. But there is clearly a case that there are no new jobs. Who are the claimants of the new jobs? The youth. So if the employment does not, if the investments don't happen, it's the youth that gets hit. So because jobs are not getting created, we are seeing women getting discriminated. We are seeing youth facing a bleak future. And of course, we will fail to encash the demographic dividend, which again, I think Professor Santosh Mehrotra is better qualified to speak about. And I think he's going to speak about it as well. So we'll listen to him. And lastly, to all those people who are hung up on growth, if we don't take care of employment and the demographic dividend, it's going to hurt our growth as well. So hanging on to growth alone without looking at employment, strategically, even for them, is not a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vyas. So let me summarize what Sarah has presented. So we are more concerned about growth without discussing employment situations. And you go to developed countries and they are more concerned about employment. And of course there is growth. And you go to the US and you will find that even 3-4% economic growth and their employment growth is very healthy. So something wrong with our GDP dynamics, the industry that is growing. So something maybe Sir will focus more on this aspect. And the second aspect is that although total labor force is around 900 some millions, right? So employment is 430 something less than that. And if you add up the unemployment persons, so remaining 400 millions, where have they gone? So missing labor force, right? So where have they gone? And what is consequence for us as a society? That we should concern about them. Trace about what is the happening. That 400 million people, they are not in the labor markets, right? And third aspect about is the wage inequalities, right? Significantly, the wage inequality has gone up, and information is happening rapid rate. At the same time, the salary and other employment has gone down. This is, we are more concerned about the formal employment. And as you know that the public sector employment has gone down significantly. And similarly, the lack of investment. And this has been going on quite a long time. The private investment has gone down. Despite very slight increase in government investment, it is not able to compensate the private investment. Unless we reverse the trend, we are not going to see the employment generations. So last aspect is the youth. The very high youth unemployment, almost around 40% or more. So let me invite our next speaker, Professor Amitabh Kundu, to share his ideas and address the gatherings. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, so just one second. All of you can use the hashtag FECO-2023 to make social media posts. Yeah, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Ranjan, no promise made of landing in the destination 2 minutes before the scheduled time. So I need chairperson's intervention because, years lapsed after the demonetization and also the fear of COVID going down has not only liberated the economy, it has also liberated the argumentative Indians in the seminars. Professor Chandiramani, Professor Dash, colleagues, and student participants who are worried about the future of employment not only as an academic issue but also as a personal matter of personal well-being. For the first time, I must say, not many occasions when I feel empirically challenged, and which I do just in front of just a CEO, who gives a perspective of relationship between employment and growth as an important paradigm, from the ones that are being pursued. I must say, I have an academic disadvantage, empirical disadvantage. Here is a person who is digging out data from the complex social relations within the household and making it not only an academic exercise, also a business, surviving in the market. And here is me who is looking at the secondary data, sometimes tertiary data, crunching it. Occasionally, I look at the primary data also when I'm involved. But certainly, that creates an uneven playing field coming next after Mahesh Vyas. So what I would do, those who have the field data and get great experience. I had a PhD student who did an excellent field work, brought 3 states data and presented it. They have an advantage because when we questioned that your trends and patterns for the 3 states are not in conformity of what we have from so-called national sources, the person says, look at my sampling framework. Look at my methodology of canvassing the questionnaire, and we find absolutely no fault. And yet we found that there are differences at the ground level, which is starking. So obviously, the question remains in my mind that when the ground reality being captured meticulously through a sample contradicts or comes in with rough edges with the other statistics, how do you address that in terms of sampling frame? Because I have been associated with many of these surveys of NSS where you focus over sampling certain categories, and then you find that the results are not really in harmony with the overall macro data system. So these are the questions which I have in my mind. I will just briefly share them in the first part. And what I would do, as Dr. Das was suggesting, I would suggest one specific way of addressing the problem of unemployment, identify an area of concern, which is basically the urban unemployment. Mahesh's presentation also focused on that. And how do you really perhaps, give some kind of a roadmap which may work or we may be considered in this conference for discussion. But before I go to the solution bit, which is in my area of research, urban development and, having a more balanced, spatially, integrated urbanization to which we are committed for SDG, I just quickly identify the problem on the basis of my quick understanding of the data situation. This is ILO. ILO gives data from 1991 onwards. We got it for 2021. And they have some kind of an international adjustment methodology. In 2017, I went into the details. They looked at the new data sources in different countries and updated that. And you have the data for India, usual status. You find nowhere between 1991 and 2020, the figure is 5%. No matter what happened, you have 5 point something. Only change is 2020, 8%, and then it is coming down to 5.98, which is almost 6. But then I'm just posing this, that this is the statistics we have from an international source, which say that they have made adjustment on the basis of the latest data sources. I've done something sacrilegious. I put National Sample Survey unemployment surveys with the PLFS data, which many people do, but many people strongly react to that. That's why I put some red mark. We do find that unemployment rate has been declining. I would come to the employment rate and the labor force participation in a minute. It was declining by National Sample Survey, and it's also declining by PLFS. But what we find is there's a jump in the PLFS unemployment rate, and you know that report for 2017-18 created furor. Niti Aayog said this should not be published, this should not be, in fact, I was in some of the meetings with Amitabh Kant and Rajiv Kumar, and I said, what is this going on? We should release the data, and if you have some sampling issues which were being debated in the newspapers, that should be sorted out properly, or write a note. But the government was adamant in not releasing for whatever reason. Now you find Mr. Ramesh Chand now looking at 2017-18 data along with 2020-21, which means that 2017-18 high unemployment rate which was reported has been accepted by the government. But nonetheless, you do have this scenario that PLFS is reporting decline in the unemployment rate. Well, this is the monthly figure. I just got it from CMIE. You do find that Mahesh talked about high unemployment rate, and he has to explain every time monthly data is released. It's like Tendulkar playing a shot. Whichever direction he hits, that's a record. He has never done that at this stage in such a game. So similarly, whenever your report comes up, the monthly figures, well, there is a debate. And I personally believe that one should look at the long-term trends. You have 8.3% November, December, but we had 8% even earlier in this year itself. Now, hopefully, I was looking at the daily data. Hopefully, January would be slightly less. But coming to your question of participation rate, labor force participation rate, we know we have to examine each age group to see what's happening. Because working age and higher education age, there's an overlap. So you have to find out to what extent the drop in the labor force participation rate and workforce participation rate is because of withdrawal of persons, from the labor market for higher education. That's one small point, but I think the basic point that Mahesh has made is valid. But you do find there was a significant decline, 2004-5 to 2011-12, both labor force participation rate and workforce participation rate. I don't have to perhaps explain the difference because the unemployed are also part of the labor force. But look at the labor force participation rate from PLFS by usual status and weekly status. This is coming from Niti Aayog. Just 5 days ago, this table was released. Ramesh Chand, my apologies. He just mentioned that, look, labor force participation rate is increasing. By usual status, 36.9, this is rural-urban combined. Urban is an area of concern. Rural, there is an increase in the agricultural workers because of the perhaps distress, whatever may be the reason, but work participation rate, and Ramesh Chand gave a very strange reason. He said, because of the difficulties, the household work out their own strategies, and then they create employment for themselves. And that is a rather cruel argument to say that, well, difficulties create employment on their own. But nonetheless, employment has come up, and you do find that labor force participation rate by both the definitions in the rural and urban areas. Urban is a problem. Sorry, you may not be able to read all the data properly, but just trust me and we can discuss subsequently. And here is the data for workforce participation rate, where again you do find this is all PLFS, shows that there's an increase in the workforce participation rate in both in rural and urban areas. But in urban areas, particularly for males, there are problems for women. And that's where I think the conclusions are converging. I have seen a paper by Mohanan on the PLFS data, and he comes to the same conclusion that Mahesh gave us just now, that there's a distress employment, the quality of employment has gone down. You have households which are creating jobs for household-based unpaid activities, that kind of employment has come up. And that's why the tables that I gave you from PLFS gives a rather satisfying picture that things are not that bad. Workforce participation and total employment, total figures also show that certainly there has been, increase in employment, compensating for the increase in the total number. That's again, I'm saying, coming from PLFS, but nonetheless, as I mentioned, that there are areas of concern in the urban area. First, the employment growth rate in some years is stagnant, as was mentioned, but this increase is very marginal, number one. Number two, unemployment rate by weekly status has gone up slightly in many of the states if you take the state level data with standard error, but certainly this is an area of concern. Third, even rate of population growth in urban areas have not gone up, and that is something to worry about, because all the projections that were made about urban population growth rate, rural urban migrant coming in and jobs being created, urban employment rate will go up, all that is being shown to be not coming out to be true. So that is the reason what I thought that I will just quickly propose some kind of roadmap. How much time do I have now?
So you have 10 more minutes.
10 more minutes, okay, thank you. You see, as I was mentioning, that in the urban areas, employment in manufacturing has not gone up, and employment in electricity, water, all the formal sectors, that has not increased much, whereas construction sector, this is one, where that there is some kind of a supply-driven, distress-driven increase in the employment. And also in the rural areas, you do find agricultural employment, and in fact, in many of the states, you do find that the share of rural income has gone up in the state domestic product. I was, before a few months, advising this Madhya Pradesh government. You find that the share of not only agricultural employment has gone up, part of it is distress employment, but income share has also gone up. And as I mentioned, that the self-employment has gone up in the rural areas, and largely because of the distress kind of employment, family-linked employment. So that is a matter of concern, that how come the urban centers, which are engines of growth, are not getting people from the rural areas or showing vibrancy in terms of employment. Now, when I said that, look at the projections of urban population. The projection made by the UN, there are green pillars which show the growth rate of urban population between 25 and 30. We have population projection for urban population 20 to 25 also. And why 5 pillars? All for the same year, 25 to 30. At different points of time, World Urbanization Prospect has revised the growth rate of urban population downwards, because the dynamism which is supposed to be showing in the urban economy is not coming up. And that's why you see year after year, World Urbanization Prospect has revised it downwards, and the dark blue ones are also showing, the growth rate of urban population 2045-50. This has also been revised downwards. Look at the pillars of urban growth. You do find the thin line shows the growth rate, and the pillars are showing the percentage of urban population, which is, of course, is going up. But growth rate of urban population, there is some definitional factor, have made the adjustment. That's why the curve goes up and down. But growth rate of urban population is 2.7. Was 91, 2001, remains at 2.7. And that too because of census activism. 2,800 new census towns have been created. Had they not been identified, you would have had 2.5%. Urban centers are not taking, helping the sectoral diversification by attracting people. And this is Arvind Subramaniam's economic survey created an impression that migration rate has gone up significantly. And that is something which really needs to be looked at much more carefully, because you see, the chapter was called in the economic survey, India on the move and churning. So he has said that every year 9 million people move from one state to another on the basis of railway ticket data. If that was the case, there would be 90 million people from, during 2001 and 11. 90 million interstate migrants, total migrants for the lifetime period is 70 million. So obviously there is some problem in the methodology, which we discussed with him, and he said, yes, perhaps other things need to be done, but we have a figure, percentage of migrants in the urban areas has not gone up. We have 29%, 30%, and suddenly 2011 shows significant increase in the percentage of urban population. And that is what I'm investigating. You do find, just come to the last, I'll go quickly. Last row, you do find that migrants for all reasons have increased in 2011, but not faster than 2091, 2001. So where is this, increase in the migration which is coming up? And as far as the males are concerned, again, you do find female migration from rural to urban areas coming up, and again getting jobs in the urban economy in a very, very low productive and low income sector. You do find that the male migration for employment reasons is 26.9% compared to the earlier decade, 74%. So basically, my submission is we have analyzed that the migration to the existing towns have not gone up. It is the new towns which have been identified, and in those new towns, which are small, large villages, there's a large number of women who are migrants because of marriage reasons. They get added up, and that's why we are getting a picture that migration rate has gone up. But actually, you do find that cities are becoming exclusionary. There's a paper on exclusionary urbanization, which shows that the migration rate of the scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, and Muslim population from the rural to urban areas have gone down. Of course, there are problems in getting access to the housing market, particularly for the minorities, but there are other reasons. You find the vulnerable sections are not moving in. And well, I don't want to deal with this. So basically, there are issues with the Indian urbanization. Again, I will skip this. Percentage of urban population living in large cities is very, very high. And that is one factor which is creating a problem. You find the percentage of urban population in 5 million plus cities is 7.5 in Europe, and Africa 9, 15 in less developed countries, world average 15.5, 16 for developed countries. South Central Asia 13%, 23%, India 23.5%. The large cities are linked to the global market. The global market is exporting. We are importing uncertainties from the global market. The large cities are very, very vulnerable. You look at the top 25 cities of India, excepting Bengaluru and Puducherry, the growth rate has gone down for 23 cities out of 25. So basically, I'm saying that the share of class 1 cities was going up, but in many states now it has started going down. The large cities are being affected. And there's a thesis, I'll take another 2-3 minutes. Is that all right? Yes. Just 2-3 minutes I'll take. You see, UN has come out with a new methodology, degree of urbanization, and saying many of the Asian countries are not recognizing the employment growth potential which are around the large cities. Please include them with the urban fold, support them, and that is how we can perhaps address the problems of huge unemployment that is reported in the urban areas, identify new small towns. There are district headquarters coming up. There are many urban centers. They're something which Partho Chatterjee calls subaltern urbanization. The people are creating employment for themselves through struggle for survival. You do find that the World Bank has identified Indian percentage of urban population to be something like 52%. Very recent report has come out. They have said that India is not recognizing the growth in the peripheral areas of the large cities and new urban centers which are coming up. If you do that, if you stabilize the infrastructure and the basic services, create employment potentials in these areas, like we have JNE and URM, you have Smart Cities Mission, all for large cities. If you identify at least 1,000 small and medium towns, provide them infrastructural facilities, that's why unemployment rate is very high. I mean, we should be in a position to sort that out. I will just touch upon the thesis of premature deindustrialization of Danny Roderick at the Harvard University. He says percentage share of manufacturing and of industries is declining at the global level. Nothing to worry. Germany, France, Switzerland, they can manage if the manufacturing share is going down. But what about the middle income countries? Their share is going down. The share of China has started going down. Share of India in the manufacturing sector has started going down. So there is, if manufacturing sector share start going down at 30% level to 25%, I would be certainly worried, and something needs to be done to challenge this. I want to skip this. And basically, my submission, therefore, is the real area of employment generation concern is in the semi-urban, peri-urban areas and large number of small and medium towns. Many of the large cities are becoming exclusionary. There's a lot of formalization, concern for environment. And during the COVID period, I can tell you, 14 states have passed ordinances or in the process of passing rules that they will reserve jobs for the local people at the lowest level. This is also affecting the overall pace of urbanization. We need to address this issue. And if you are committed to SDG, Sustainable Development Goals for 2030, we do need to really promote a different kind of urban structure. I was asked by Agro Foundation to prepare an alternate strategy for urbanization for the Niti Aayog. I've submitted it. I have been told it is under consideration, whatever it means. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. You have raised few points. The first one is that labor force participation rate has increased little bit slightly, and as per the WTO or ILO data. And similarly, the unemployment rate is not in par with the CMI that whatever is presenting. And also the quality of data or quality of jobs, so that is in, let's say, a similar view about that things. But you are suggesting that developing new towns, right, to identify new towns, new census towns, that the strategy to generate more employment, right? And how it is feasible, what are the steps required, and what infrastructure required, what kind of quality of jobs it will generate, that need to be further discussion. Thank you so much, sir. So now my job is to pose question to two speakers. So we'll have discussion sessions, and before, maybe I will open up the podium for the 5 minutes for, maybe we'll take some few questions from the audience. The first questions are both of you, that the employment elasticity of growth that has gone down significantly starting from 80s, 90s, and it is a secular declining trend. Now we call them jobless growth, job loss, and some kind of neutrality of job growth. Why this is happening? What are the factors that is leading to this? Is it the globalization or something else is happening with this?
You see, I haven't done an extensive analysis of the employment elasticities across the countries, but this, as I said, Harvard Business School thinks is happening in a large number of developing countries because you are linked with the global capital market. The technology that you are getting is very, very different, which is making them more and more dependent on the global capital market. And this is the case in India. It has not happened as much as in many of the African countries. And Danny Roderick has not said that India has already come under this fold, but he said this threat of premature deindustrialization exists basically because your large cities which are connected to the global market are based on a technology which is not, increasing the employment potential. And also there is some kind of a, what's it called, exclusionary tendency. The middle class and the upper class on the name of, environment, the brown, technology, which is labor intensive, is not being encouraged. And as I said, this is a paper which was published 3 months ago, that most of the Indian cities are exclusionary. Growth rate in the scheduled caste population in the large cities is much less 2001-11 than earlier decades. Growth rate of Muslim population particularly has got a big hit, in the existing towns. But what has happened in the new towns, I mentioned 2,800 new towns, you have a large percentage of scheduled caste, scheduled tribe and Muslim population. And that's what is keeping the percentage figure. So I certainly think that the technology that we are having for our growth strategy that can perhaps give an answer.
Your views, please, sir.
I don't have much to add to what Professor Kundu has said. I think reference to the Dani paper, Roderick Dani paper, is the most appropriate, answer to your question. That we have peaked out our manufacturing. It's a premature peaking out of the manufacturing sector, and that premature part is a problem. So I think this is structural problem.
So my second question is, sir, for you, since you are working with the data, so what is the stress level in the employment markets? Stress, kind of unemployment, employment, and what kind of employment that is generating now? Is it similar to the previous one, or more information is happening?
There's huge difference in the numbers of unemployment and employment rate state-wise. Very big differences. So often I am kind of um, confronted by the state government of, for example, Haryana. And journalists from there or the government over there says that how come you call our state having a very high unemployment rate? It's like 30% or so. So I say Haryana has a different problem because it's an agrarian economy that has rapidly changed into an industrial economy, has rapidly changed into a services economy. You take Faridabad industrial, you take Panipat industrial, you take Gurgaon, it's highly services sector. And therefore, there is huge migration into Haryana, and that adds to the unemployment challenge. The labor participation rate in Haryana is much higher than in the neighboring states. So, oftentimes when somebody tells me that this is a Congress ki CMI, it comes, trolls are there all over the place. I say, well, I also say BJP run Uttar Pradesh has got like single-digit unemployment rate. But there are huge differences. Uttar Pradesh has a very low labor participation rate. And the Congress run Rajasthan has a very high unemployment rate, almost like Haryana. Also the same problem over there, large share of services sector, industrial northern belt of Rajasthan. So I think there are huge differences state by state. To summarize that in any one way is going to be difficult.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I'm coming back to the manufacturing sector, and that is the what proxy for the quality employment, everything. But over period, your data sources is suggesting that the employment level has gone down from 51 million to something around 30 million. So the net deduction of around 20 million. So that means we are also giving a lot of emphasis on Make in India, Made in India, and before that, new manufacturing policy. Despite all these aspects, the manufacturing employment has decelerated quite significantly. I'm sure that COVID impact also affected so much. So what need to be done to reverse this trend? One aspect we have already talked about, that investment has gone down. But same time, the government has also role, and we have facilitating FDI and other things. And the FDI, that how much the employment is creating, there's a lot of doubts about these things. But your takeaways from this manufacturing employment that is going down?
So maybe I'll take a little time to answer this question. It's a complex and interesting question. So the first thing I'll go back to is to the 1990s. And I'll say here, we went gung-ho big times in the market saying that India is such a fantastic country that we have just skipped this manufacturing sector growth. We have straight gone to the services sector. So economies transit from being an agrarian economy to becoming an industrial economy, and then transit to becoming a services economy. And we said, look, we are smarter than the rest of the world. We learn faster, and we have quickly gone to the services sector. And therefore, there we are. We stopped investing into the manufacturing sector long ago. So if you give the services sector's biggest darling, which is the IT sector, a 10-year tax break, you're just telling people stop manufacturing. Just move into the IT sector, you get 10-year tax break. Like, this is mind-blowing. You give it to the automobile sector, or even automobiles has got massive protection from imports. So I think we bent backwards. We worked very hard to say we do not want to focus on manufacturing. We want to move to services sector. So that's the first thing. Once you lay that foundation for more than a decade to say we do not want manufacturing, then you come back and say make in India, you have lost the bus. So it's not going to be easy to go back to manufacturing. It's a difficult task. You've got to undo that 10-year tax holiday to IT. The second problem is a large part of the investments in India by the larger industrial enterprises has been in those segments like infrastructure, which have got this viability gap thing that they get from the government. So investments will go in those areas where you give SOPs. And therefore, which is an okay thing to do, but then what happens is investments do not go into places where there are no incentives. So labor intensive textiles, leather, and so on and so forth may not get investments, and it will be manufacture of mobile for export, which is not so labor intensive, will get this. So the policies which say that we are going to pick the winners ensures that the animal spirits to go and fight big time like we did in the liberalization era will not happen. So cherry picking the industries is a bad idea. Getting after bankers for their loans becoming NPAs is a bad idea. So create the environment that will promote animal spirits. And it's quite possible that manufacturing will come back because we have the natural resources, we have the human resources. But when 10 years ago you told all the engineers of India, stop working in factories and go to offices, we caused a structural damage to our human resources.
Yeah.
I think before a decade, we always felt that the informal sector comes up in the urban areas. You know, the unorganized sector grows in the urban areas. Informality is increasing. Whereas the rural areas, we never bothered about unorganized. In fact, when I was chairing a committee, we thought that the slum data should not be collected from the rural areas. But now, I think the studies, in fact, Mahesh also mentioned, the quality of employment in the rural areas and the informality is coming up in a significant way. Santosh's paper, he talks about agricultural employment increasing. One large part of it is because there are no other possibilities there in the rural areas. Manufacturing sector in the urban areas have not grown. That is coming out of the CMI data as well as the other sources. So something is wrong in the urban dynamism, which is being reflected in high unemployment rate and low rate of rural-urban migration. And that needs to be addressed. Many of you might know that PLFS also gives data on migration. You see, this decade has been disastrous for health sector and the economy for India. I'm talking about COVID and other things. But it has been also disastrous for the data. We don't have yet time schedule for census. And yesterday evening we were discussing with Mahesh that unless you have the census, your other data sources are not getting because you need the appropriate weightages. So what we did, myself and Mohanan, this has come out in a paper in Hindustan Times. These days I feel that many of the research journals go unread. So I think you get into the policy through the media, where we have shown that there's a massive dislocation that took place in the first and the second quarter of the pandemic. I'm talking about, April, May, June, July. Many of them came back because the rural economy is not able to absorb, but some have stayed back. Interstate migrants, many have stayed back because urban economy is not able to offer. So that is the worry. In urban areas, I have a feeling there is middle class capture. Michael Lipton talks about elite capture in urban development in third world countries. I have a feeling to some extent the urban middle class is able to resist the informality. They are protecting their colonies much better than they did in the 70s and the 80s. And that is the reason why you find growth of the informal sector has slowed down. Manufacturing informal sector is not coming up. And that is something which needs to be addressed from the point of view of employment. The key message I take from just a CEO is that your development strategy must have employment in the core of the growth. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So we would like to have right to a job, employment. So maybe one, two more questions. Yeah. Sir, I will ask one controversial question about the GST. So, what is the impact of GST on employment? It was very rosy picture has been given that GST will lead that theoretically, and it will create a lot of opportunity for this. But and we don't see any impact or let's say some negative impact on GST, particularly on MSME sector that may have some consequence for employment. No idea.
I don't do causal studies, so I don't know.
Okay, so thank you so much. Let me open the question answer session for the audience, and we will encourage all the students to ask as much as question as possible. So we have maximum 10 minutes. Please identify yourself and introduce yourself, and question should be very brief. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So we have around 5 to 7 minutes
Hello,
actually. Very quick.
Thank you for all. Thank you to all the speakers for your illuminating presentations. Although you've asked me to keep the question brief, sir, I have a little bit of context. I'll just go into that. My question was directed to primarily Dr. Kundu. So, Doctor, with the increasing focus on urban development, we have seen many criticisms of transit-oriented development adapted by many municipalities, and particularly from environmental and civic groups. And many civic groups, even in Pune, have opposed many moves under the banner of TOD. Now, speaking geographically, many socioeconomic mobility issues that even you outlined, including gentrification, are tied strongly with employment and transit, especially like. Could you please speak a little louder? Sorry, transit especially plays an important role in sort of. What's the question? Sorry. I lost my train of thought. So I wanted to know your opinion on TOD within the context of the importance of transit.
Transit-oriented development and its context in urban development.
Transit-oriented development and its transit-oriented development. Yeah, transit. TOD. Transit-oriented development. Its prospect for urban development.
You're talking about strengthening rural-urban linkages. In fact, goal 11 of SDG, which is relating to settlement structure, certainly talks about much greater relationship between the city and the peripheral townships, which is missing in many of the developing countries. And that we have information from Indian situation that the rural-urban interlinkages, people transiting on the daily basis or the weekly basis has certainly gone up. And we have that information, but certainly that needs to be strengthened because recognize the fact that the cities do not have infrastructural provision to adequately give a decent living condition for this. And also think about it. A large number of migrants who left the cities in April, May, June 2020, cursing the cities, never will come back. The PLFS data do show that the percentage of migrants in the urban areas and rural areas in 2019-20 is more or less the same as in 2007-8. So that means a large number of intrastate migrants have come back. A certain percentage of interstate migrants have not come back. So I entirely agree that strengthening the rural-urban linkages, linking up small and medium towns with through the development corridors with the national economy should create demand, effective demand within the countries and make our dependence on the global market a little less so that our city economies are not very vulnerable linked to the global capital market. Thank you.
Here I have a question. I'm Basant Potnuru from Ford School of Management. My question is to Dr. Vyas. The government is releasing the net EPF accounts every quarter, and it shows that an increasing trend. How do you relate that in your employment and unemployment trends that you have shown? Thank you.
So the EPFO is the numbers released by them relate to the number of people who registered with the EPFO system. And they give correctly the numbers of people who got in, got out, net numbers, and so on and so forth. And it is seen from there that the monthly numbers tell us that the net EPFO additions are pretty robust. So there are many problems with EPFO as a measure of employment, because it's not necessarily a growth in employment, because there are people who qualify for the scheme and don't, and when they qualify, then a bulk of 19, 20 people come in over here. But those things apart, recently, I think about a month ago or so, I wrote a piece in Business Standard showing that the increase shown in the monthly EPFO releases by the government, by the EPFO itself, do not add up to the EPFO numbers given in the EPFO's annual report. So the annual report is placed in the parliament every year, which shows a decline in the number of people contributing to the EPFO in the last 2 years. So while the monthly numbers are showing a robust increase, the problem is that they do not get revised. Now, when an EPFO registration number is released for the first time, by the time it is a year from that, okay, by the time it's a year from that, that number is halved. Okay? So suppose they said there was an addition of, let us say, 100 in the month of April, then by the time they reach March, they say the number is revised to 50. Now, worse, after that, they stop giving revisions. And there are revisions. Now, the April number is revised in March, for example. The May number is revised till March, not beyond that. The next number is revised again till March. So if you look at the series, it's got no sense, because one has got 12 iterations of revisions, one has got no iteration of revisions, and once they give an annual number, they never revised it. But the annual report, which comes about 6 months after they end a year in the monthly numbers, gives the final number. And that number shows a decline in EPFO. So my strong recommendation, which I wrote in Business Standard column approximately a month ago, said that do not use the monthly releases of the EPFO. I paid a small price for that, but nevertheless, I did enlighten some people.
So this is the last comment. So we are running out of time. The last comment.
I have a question. Yeah, this is Hemlata Tiwari. Yeah. So the question is with regards to the, it's out here. The disabled population. Like if you really see, we have almost like 8 to 10% of the disabled population, which comes around to 70 million in India itself. So do we have any statistics per se, like, what is the unemployment and the employment rate for the disabled people, the people with the disabilities? And how do we get that? How do we track it at a nation level? So the question to you, sir. Mahesh.
At least at CMI, we unfortunately do not capture this data. So the official system does have something?
Yeah, in fact, there is one survey which was specifically designed to find out the percentage or the number of people who are disabled. We don't use that word disability, call it challenge, and basically there are 3 or 4 dimensions of challenge which were taken in, motor disability, visual disability, and also mental disability. Incidentally, I chaired that committee for God knows what reason, but we are very skeptical whether we can ask this question about mental instability or mental challenge to families, particularly relating to the woman in the household. Everybody said they would never say that because you don't get anything out of it. In Western countries, by the way, United States and Europe report something like 15-16% people who are somehow challenged. But because there are benefits, there are schemes under which you have a card, and somebody who was perfectly normal to me, he suddenly showed a card. He said, I have this disability, I get this kind of a benefit. So in India, the percentage figure comes to 3-4% only. think about it. Nutritionally challenged country have only 3-4% of challenge in all spheres. And I know the ground level staff from NSSO came back and told that if we canvass the questionnaire, if the lady of the household is this mother-in-law, he will say, my daughter-in-law is challenged mentally, and the other way will happen if you ask the daughter-in-law or the mother-in-law. So we thought that perhaps this survey would be absolutely useless. But we did canvass and we got good responses. We had a health expert also accompanying in the initial pilot study. And we had a reasonably, and subsequently there was another survey, I know, there has been some increase because there are some facilities, unless you tie up some benefits with the, those who are challenged, people have no incentive to report that. And now I think it is coming up, but the figure is certainly grossly underreported, basically because the welfare measures are not really being targeted properly, and there's no information about that also in the country. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. As a concluding remark, I will give the opportunity to speaker to any suggestion for the students. Any suggestion for the student? And we know that the future is very challenging. So, what would you like to suggest our students or as a student? Thank you, sir.
Just one small little thing I'll have to suggest to the students over here, that there is no end to learning. You will graduate, you'll find a job, you'll find a very good job, but all jobs are rendered useless pretty soon. So one has to keep learning in life. This is not the end of learning when you step out of school. I learned programming in R when I reached a wonderful age of 60. So you learn. You got to keep learning.
See, I have one serious question haunting me for the last 10, 12 years. It was in Lucknow that a professor told me this, that, I look at the secondary data for the rural areas of this district, and the picture that I get is very different from when I go and visit and try to understand, I find my assessment is very different. And then I send my students with a questionnaire. And they come up, and I find a picture is also very different from what I myself observed. So there is a mismatch between secondary data, my perception, and the data that you are collecting through questionnaire. So I told him a very famous line from a very famous poet, I don't remember his name, but it's a Hindi film song, which is, तुझको देखा है मेरी नजरों ने, तुझको देखा है मेरी नजरों ने, करें तारीफ हम मगर कैसे? How can I praise you? Because my eyes see you and my lips, they speak. So there is a lack of coordination between my eyes and my lips. I think this is serious. I think we have to somehow reconcile. The gaps have to be addressed, and I think the young group of researchers should be able to take up this challenge. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. May I invite our director, ma'am, Dr. Jyoti Chandiramani, to felicitate our speakers, and also may I invite Professor James West, please come to the dais for felicitation. Thank you.
James West was the moderator for the parallel track that was happening on papers, so that is why he's here.
And we finished a little bit late, but we're
Yeah.
for comments. Thank you.
Yeah, can we just wait for